Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is episode number 99 of the Lean Blog Podcast for October 4th, 2010. My guests today are Brant Cooper and Patrick Vlaskovits, two entrepreneurs from California who are the co-authors of the book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, a cheat sheet to the 4 steps to the epiphany. Now, in the last year, I've taken a really strong interest in the so-called lean startups world and methodology, led by people including Eric Ries, who I'll be doing a podcast with later this year. I've written about him and shared video of him on the blog. And Steve Blank, the author of the 2005 book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. So that is the book that Brant and Patrick have written a shorter cheat sheet book about, and we'll be talking with them today. I hope this will be of interest to those of you both in traditional big companies or working in healthcare, in addition to people from the startup world. I worked for a software and consulting startup from 2001 to 2004, and I found that, to me at least, the Lean Startups material is a great way to think back through those old experiences and to think about my work in healthcare today in terms of developing new processes, being customer-focused, following the scientific method. I think there's some really interesting stuff here. So you can find the blog post about this episode with links to both Brant and Patrick and other material at leanblog.org/99. So as always, I want to thank you for listening. Well, I want to welcome today's guests, Brant Cooper and Patrick Vlaskovits. Brant, if you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure, Mark. I've done a little bit of everything in my career. I started out sort of on the technical side in IT and doing database development, managed professional services, then sort of started moving over to the dark side of product management and marketing, and ran marketing product management for a couple of startup companies. And now for the last several years, I've been an independent consultant focusing primarily on helping young startup companies get going and achieve market traction.
Okay, thanks, Brant. And our other guest and co-author, Patrick Vlaskovits, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So I've done also quite a few different things. Back right after college, helped found a web development shop, after which bounced around in Europe for a few years, and then came back and collaborated with Brant on this book after reading the 4 steps, which essentially changed my view of how to build a startup pretty radically as I was trying to build one.
Well, thanks. And so you mentioned the 4 steps, and in Steve Blank's book, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, Successful Strategies for Products That Win. And so, Patrick, if you can introduce your book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development. You call it a cheat sheet to the 4 steps. So I wonder if you could describe the book and talk a little bit about this customer development process, as you call it.
Sure. So why don't I kind of talk a little bit about the book, and then I'll have Brant describe customer development in a little further detail. So
great.
The book was born out of Brant's and my passion for the 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which is a fantastic book and has been described by some as sort of the secret Bible of the Silicon Valley. It has tremendous explanatory power in terms of defining and explaining why startups make it and why don't. The reason we decided to write the book is because we wanted to basically distill the core concepts of Steve's book down to a very quick, readable format. Very cheat sheet, as we say. Mm-hmm. There's so much wisdom and knowledge in Steve's book, right, but we wanted to extract sort of the core parts of it and then update it with some of the recent thinking that had been done around minimal viable products, Eric Ries' Lean Startups, Dave McClure's Pirate Metrics, concepts like product market fit, which I believe Mark Andreessen had originated or popularized, and then Sean Ellis's sort of 40% rule for product market fit as well.
And Patrick, if you could talk a little bit about what do you mean by a customer development process? I mean, it sounds different. A lot of organizations would talk about product development, but this is a very different methodology, right?
Yep. So the way I would describe the customer development process from a super high level is engineering processes for sales and marketing. So again, at a high level, if you look at customer development as questioning your own assumptions, testing your hypotheses, and doing that by quote unquote getting out of the building by talking to your customers, then that is sort of the high level process. And then implementing specific principles like Patrick were mentioning, seeking product market fit, and some of the integrating some of the customer development work that you're doing into your development processes. So then you can look at customer development as this high level, test your assumptions all the way down to details of actually how you get out of the building, how do you engage in customers, how do you bring that information back and integrate it into your product development as well as your other business operations.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk about this idea of a process for sales and marketing. When you say it's sort of a traditional view that people would think, well, wait, sales and marketing, that's creative, that's not a repeatable process. I mean, do people cringe or sort of push back at this notion of actually having, or as you said, engineering a process for doing that?
Well, I found it tends to depend on where the individual is coming from. I think it appeals to technical people. So in the past or traditionally, technical people sort of want to throw their hands up in the air and say, "Listen, marketing, sales, that's for somebody else to do." It's sort of this fluffy stuff. I don't get it, and I think that leads to potential problems, especially when you're actually bringing that product to market. Because hey, maybe nobody wants the product because that interaction with the potential market didn't happen. So having a rigorous process that technical people can follow, that allows them to test their market and business model hypotheses during product development appeals to the technical people, and they find it to be a very powerful concept. So I find a lot of my clients are from that side of the house. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a harder sale, in my opinion, to sort of traditional sales and marketing people. But I also think that as marketing analytics has become popular, what we find is that there are a lot of sales and marketing people that also are drawn to or forced to look at return on investment, and so for their marketing activities or for their selling activities. And so if that's the case, then having these processes is a means of doing that.
Right. And Patrick, maybe you can comment or elaborate on this some more, but when Brant brought up the point of getting technical people out to talk with customers, I mean, this is could be viewed as maybe either a much more integrated approach to engineering and sales and marketing instead of being in silos where we develop a product and chuck it over the wall and you go sell it. I mean, is that to me that seems similar to what you see with lean and other settings where instead of somebody designing a hospital building and then chucking over the wall, I don't know how you chuck a building over a wall, but hand it off to the people that actually have to run the place. This seems like a much more iterative, integrated approach. Is that fair to say?
Without a doubt, absolutely. And talking Steve Blank and Brant and I, we sat down to talk about this, and I think Steve even said the most important thing that someone can take out of customer development, if they take nothing else away, is to get out of the building. And I couldn't agree more. Where right. Where it's you got to, as there's an entrepreneur named Dan Martell, he talks about, he goes, you have to get your customers' reality, and what that means is, at the end of the day, you are not your customer. You have different problems. You view the world differently. You have different limits, budgets, and like you said, so much sort of hitherto has been, okay, I'm going to design something very cool, what I think the customer needs. I'm going to chuck it over the wall, and he should just use it, right? And then getting out of the building really sort of obviates that intentionally, and forces you to kind of recognize the realities of the customer and how they're solving their problems and the things they do. And I know when I did this, I had major epiphanies when I realized that my customers weren't rational, and they knew they weren't being rational. For example, pricing decisions, and they would explain to me that they would actually rather pay more for my product than if they could have if it could be a monthly sort of a cost versus a one-time spike that may have been actually may have cost them less. And for me, maybe I was a complete naive, but for me that was a major epiphany when I realized my customers, even though they're not being rational, but there are limits and there's reasons why they are perhaps not being rational. And you can only have those sorts of epiphanies about your product and about the problem and about the solution if you're getting out of the building. And I strongly believe that.
Well, and that to me sounds an awful lot like the lean principle of going to the Gemba, and not just in a manufacturing setting. Toyota famously, when they went through a redesign of their minivan, had the chief engineer from Japan come and rent minivans of different makes and models and literally drove them coast to coast across the U.S. and Canada, to put himself, I mean, as you were saying, he is not the customer, but he was trying to at least live a day in the life of the customer. And so maybe the question to Brant, one of the things that jumped out to me in Steve's book is this idea of, before you go to customers and start throwing product ideas at them, that you really have to understand what a day is like for your customer. So can you talk about some of that early customer understanding process that's sort of different here?
Sure. So it's very typical for product developers, for technical people, for founders who are passionate about the solution to immediately want to pitch their solution. And so it's vitally important that when you get out of the building and you're talking to your customers, that you don't influence their answers by immediately showing them product and saying, "Hey, doesn't this look great?" And your audience is going to be nice typically, and they're going to nod their head, and you're going to go away thinking that you've got this great market, but you actually haven't learned anything. And so the key to customer development is that it's a learning exercise in the beginning, and so when you go and are interviewing or talking with your customers, it's important that you're actually trying to find out what their pain is before you're pitching the solution. So I think that's something that actually trips up a lot of people, and so there are a number of ways that you can do that with customers. You want to ask open-ended questions. You want to make it not like an interview, but it's more like a conversation. So hopefully you've pulled together a meeting that is not too formal. You're not there to pitch them. You're not there to sell them. You're actually there to have a conversation about what are the problems that they're facing inside their business.
Mm-hmm. Can you point to some examples of companies that are using customer development process either independently or in conjunction with the quote unquote lean startup methodology? Are there any success stories that you can point to these days?
Well, of course, Steve wrote the book based upon his work at a number of different companies, including Supermac and Epiphany, both of which are successful companies. And Eric brought these principles to his first company, Eric Ries, and that was IMVU. Steve Blank's also sort of, first to point out that he developed these ideas, not actually by sitting in the building, but going out and researching other successful companies. So I think that there's a number of successful companies that have used some of these processes, even if they haven't called them customer development or called it lean. But more recently, there was a number of companies that demoed at Eric Ries's Lessons Learned conference last April, including Dropbox. Comes to mind, Kissmetrics. Sean Ellis has a number of companies that he's worked with, and again, I'm not sure that he ever actually called it customer development, but he was definitely using learning principles with a number of companies that he's supported. I'm working with a number of companies now that are have some measure of success, have paying customers, but they're still iterating their way towards product market fit, and that includes a company called the Hire Syndicate and Task Squid. So we're pretty early in the evolution of, or this evolution of these concepts, where they're called lean startups. or they're explicitly saying that they're doing customer development. But I think you can point to a number of companies that have used some of these processes and are quite successful.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also just to dovetail on what Brant said, in the book, actually, we have 4 case studies and of different folks who have done cust dev like things, and are very similar. And for example, DriveCam, Bruce Mueller from DriveCam spoke to us about this. And, he never called it customer development, but he was living getting out of the building. I mean, he was on his customers' job sites, every day. And he felt just instinctually he has got to be, have his pulse on exactly, what his customers' problems are. And that's that was one of the main philosophies that drove DriveCam. And again, he didn't call it customer development, but it was very, very, very similar. And we found other cases like that where, again, it wasn't called customer development per se, but the very similar types of principles, staying close to the customer, iterating and learning from the customer, and then folding that into the development process.
Yeah, because that whole idea of learning and continuously iterating, it seems to follow very much a scientific method model, or if people who know the Dr. Deming philosophy of the plan, do, study, act cycle. It's really interesting to see this idea of companies iterating and continuously learning and even changing based on that feedback. It's really kind of cool to see.
And I guess the other thing that I like to point out is that it's important to distinguish between learning from your customers and getting a list of feature requests. So successful and unsuccessful companies are often talking to their customers and getting feature requests and filling their bug tracking system with things that their customers are asking for. So there's sort of nothing new about that. But that's not really what customer development is. Customer development is more about learning what those pains are. And so the features that you are determining to implement, hopefully you understand what the pain is that they're solving, and that matches what your vision of what your product is going to be. And so there's a balance there between listening to your customers to hear what they're really saying versus being a stenographer and just writing down all of their features that they're asking for.
Right. Now, do you feel like there's broader adoption within Silicon Valley or other startup hotbeds where this has become trendy or something that VCs are looking for, or is that sort of a moot point in terms of looking for investors? It seems to me that companies going through this process tend to get to market earlier. Do you see more startups that are able to bootstrap themselves through this approach?
Well, I think that the present investment environment means that you need to prove something about your business model before you get investment. And so the lean startup doesn't speak directly to taking money or not taking money. So it's not the equivalent of bootstrapping. But in this environment, when, if you're forced to prove something about your business model before you're able to get funding, then the lean principles are exactly right on. And create a minimum product necessary to prove an aspect of your business model enough to get somebody to give you money. So I think that like all trends, I think that there are people that use these terms loosely, and so you do hear people throwing the concept of lean startup out quite a bit. Lean startup, around quite a bit, and they don't always mean precisely what Eric and others have defined it as. Yeah. And so I think there is some potential problems there, but I think in general there's a growing base of people that are applying these principles, and there are more investors that are requiring it, and so. We're still at the early stages, but I think that this is the plan going forward.
Yeah, and something you said that resonated with me, because the same thing happens with lean in healthcare and other settings. Sometimes people throw the term around loosely, just to describe something that may or not match up with kind kind of the core definitions of lean. So
right.
I understand there might be some frustration there, but maybe a final question here. A lot of the talk is focused around new companies, it seems. But do you think there's any hope or application for existing older companies that are looking to apply this to a new product or service line within an existing company? Is there any hope that they could make use of this model?
Absolutely, and in fact, I wouldn't even say it's hope. I think the people are already doing this. So Brant and I actually have worked on a few projects with larger existing companies, larger enterprises that are actively looking to sort of spur innovation via custom development processes. And again, if you look at history, people have done these things again before. So larger companies have done these things before. And in fact, there is a company, and the name doesn't come to mind at this point, but they actually did some sort of they've done sort of MVP type things, sort of faux MVP type things to see, what customers will bite on, and then go out and build it once someone's actually, sort of bid on the idea. So I guess that my answer is, one is it's already happening, and two, I think more and more companies will be adopting sort of custom development like processes. Does that mean that they'll be doing, custom development exactly the way Steve Blank describes it, or even we try to describe it? Probably not. But I don't think perfect should be the enemy of good. Mm-hmm. And I think custom development, what you take from it can generate a lot of value, even just taking bits and pieces of it, sort of. If that makes any sense.
To add to that, the customer development process evolves as a company grows. So if a company is successful and they've introduced a number of successful products, the likelihood is that they're already very well engaged with their customers, and they're learning about new innovation that they need to bring in and new products that they need to do. If you've read Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma, mm-hmm. leading companies sort of naturally do that, and there's a lot of customer development that's involved in that. The trick always is the company that needs to either compete against disruptive technology, or maybe their revenues are lagging and they feel like they need to go in a radically new direction. And then the question becomes, can they apply the early startup type of customer development inside of a big company? And I think that's very difficult to do, and it takes very strong leadership and buy-in from key executives to be able to run a group independently of the main core of their business, in order to give that group the budget they need and the opportunity to fail.
Well, the freedom.
Right. So very, very difficult, but certainly doable. And there are leading companies that are definitely doing exactly that.
Okay. And this is really interesting stuff. But in the interest of time, I guess I need to ask kind of a final last question. You use the acronym MVP a couple times, and if there's folks that are listening who don't really know that, stands for minimal viable product. And I was wondering if you could, if one of you could talk about what that term means, and tie it in again to how does customer development process tie into the lean startups methodology.
Okay, so the minimum viable product is in Patrick's and my nomenclature. We talk about the minimum viable product being the minimum functionality necessary for you to achieve a measurable objective by your customer paying something. And so I guess it's a rather esoteric definition, but what we're really trying to get to is that if you're just trying to test some part of your business model, and we recommend that you're testing something that is of risk to your business model. So if you pass this test, then it's good to move on. If you don't, it's time to pivot. But that test may be that you want your customer to pay attention to you, to click on a button, to agree to a demo. And so you have to provide enough functionality that gets them to do that, so that you have proven a specific objective that is measuring this risk. So, sort of in the larger concept, it typically means that you're building only what's necessary for a customer to pay for your product, because you've then proven at some level your business model, and you're sort of good to go on from there.
Just to add to what Brant said, a lot of people misunderstand MVP, and they take it to mean an almost intentionally sloppily built product, and then they kind of wonder why. It's kind of weird. I've seen this all the time on the net. People kind of complain why their MVP isn't getting any traction. An MVP, depending on your product and your vision and who your customer is and what solution you're providing, it could very easily be $hundreds of $1,000 MVP or even $1 million MVP. There's no rule that Eric Ries or anyone has handed down saying that MVP has to be a piece of crap, if pardon my language. And right. So, and I think that has to be sort of stated. That it depends again, like Brant said. It's a product with the fewest number of features needed to achieve a specific objective, and that users are willing to pay. Right, in some form of a scarce resource, and that could be time, money, what have you. Right, you're trying to learn something, and I think
the word viable is as important as minimum.
Right, exactly. And so I think a lot of people really misunderstand. A lot of people get really excited about MVPs, and they'll do a landing page and things like that, and that may work for certain problems and certain solutions, but for often I think very visionary things or perhaps services that rely on network effects. Those things may not work, right? So it all depends, and I really get kind of irritated when people don't really understand or don't really grok, what an MVP is, and they kind of just use it to be kind of lazy, if that makes any sense.
Right. So not sub-minimal and not sub-viable, but minimum viable product. We'll put the emphasis on the V.
That's right.
All right. Well, cool. Hey, Brant Cooper and Patrick Vlaskovits, authors of The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, a cheat sheet to the 4 steps to the epiphany. Want to thank you for taking time out today. Where can people pick up the book or find you on the web if they want to read more or reach out to you?
They can find it at custdev.com, so CUST as in Thomas, D as in dog, EV.com. And they can also get the paperback on Amazon. They can search for either Brant or myself or just The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development. And
Patrick blogs at Vlaskovits.com, and I blog at marketbynumbers.com.
Well, great. Well, I hope listeners will go and check that out and take a look at the book. And I want to thank you, Brant and Patrick, for taking time to talk today. Really interesting stuff.
Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.